for the workshop. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Let's see. Let me share my screen here. Here we go. Can everybody see the slides? I see some nodding.
Yep. Yes.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, welcome everybody to this workshop. We're going to show you a little agenda in a bit, but like the high-level overview here is we want to talk a little bit about how it is working for Google, and also how, especially focusing on how you get in, focusing on the technical interviews, right? So what should you prepare, what to expect, what's the process, and so on. We'll go a little bit more into the details of the agenda, but let's maybe do an introduction first. So who are these two people? Joyce, do you want to get started?
Sure. So hi, my name is Joyce. I have been at Google a total of, I want to say 4 years at this point. Fun fact is I'm a Roogler, so I've left the company, but I have decided to come back. A little bit about where I came from. I had no idea I wanted to go into computer science at all until high school, and even then I didn't really want to go into it. It was actually a graduation requirement in my school, and that's the only reason I got into programming in the first place. But I'm really glad I did. And then from then on, I went to college. I decided to be a computer science major and ended up teaching one of the introductory courses, which I actually highly recommend. You learn a lot of very good interviewing skills as a teacher, as a TA, because you have to explain these concepts to others and explain your thought processes to someone else, which turns out to be a very good skill for interviewing. From there, I was a Google intern. I interned on Google Plus, for those of you who remember what that was. But I worked on the photos side, so I'm only slightly embarrassed to say I worked on Google Plus, but very proud that I worked on photos. Decided to try something different, went to Apple for a bit, which was a very different culture, and worked on core graphics there because I've always been interested in computer graphics as a whole. And at the end of that, when I graduated, I decided that Google was where I wanted to be. And so I came back full-time as an engineer on Daydream and worked specifically on a product called Tiltbrush.
Great, thanks, Joyce. Yeah, what about me? Some parallels, some not. I think my fun fact on the first slide was like 97.7%. What does that mean? So we have this fun little like internal app that you can go to, and it shows you how many people at Google have been with the company for less time than you. Currently that's 97.7% for me. That makes me feel really old, but oh well. So yeah, my history basically like this. So I'm from Germany. I studied there. I had participated in the master's program there at the University of Fulda that maybe some of you are familiar with if you ever thought about an exchange program. I know that Arne Buter is engaged in getting that going. And as part of this exchange program, I actually came to SF State in 2005, and I was an exchange student for 1 semester. That was really cool. A year later, while still doing my master's program, fellow Gator, exactly. A year later, I was an intern at Google. So actually through a project that I picked up at SF State, I got this internship at Google, worked on this thing called Google Web Toolkit, which is basically a cross compiler from Java to JavaScript. That was a lot of fun. Then finished my master's and joined Google full-time in Zurich in Switzerland, working on this thing called iGoogle, which probably absolutely nobody will remember here at all, I would assume. Does anybody remember iGoogle? It's not a weird like Apple competitor product from Google at all, even though it sounds like it. But yeah, joined 2007. Oh, some people remember it, yay. And then afterwards worked on a bunch of projects, worked on Google Maps, Google Street View, worked on this thing called Photosphere, which is still in most Android apps today, Android phones today. Was the tech lead for the Google camera app on Android devices. And then for the last 5 years, I've now been working on Daydream on a project that I can't quite talk about, but yeah, it's been quite the journey. All right, Joyce, do you want to explain the agenda or?
Sure. So we're going to start by just stepping through, well, what do we look for in candidates as a whole? And so things that It's important to remember, we're not hiring you just for your technical skills. We're also hiring you for what you contribute to the team and for the culture as well. We consider you as like the person you are and not just your technical ability. So we'll talk about what we mean by that, and then we'll jump into the technical section. So what we look for specifically in the interview, assuming you're going for a software engineering full-time or intern role, and we'll talk about those a little bit specifically, and then we'll give a little bit of an overview of resources and what that you can use over the course of your actual hiring process when you get up to that point. And yeah, we want this to be a conversation. So we prepared slides, but they're really just to kind of guide what the topics that we thought might be interesting. But really what we're most interested in doing is answering your questions. So feel free just to jump on, throw something in the chat, even just speak up. We are mostly interested in just talking with you guys.
Yeah, plus one on that. I think, the slides are just there if nobody asks anything. We can definitely go through them, but otherwise we're really curious to hear about your questions. I saw one question here, whether we also talk about product management roles. Not really, unfortunately, but if you are interested, maybe ping us later on Discord and we can send you some resources about that. But yeah, we'll focus on the technical interviews in this presentation. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, I guess we have this motto at Google called like create, design, code, and build for everyone, right? And there might be like a question like what that really means exactly, right? That what we do it for absolutely everyone. Joyce, do you want to take these over?
Sure. So here at Google, diversity, equity, inclusion are high priorities for us as employees, our products, and our users. A goal of ours is to increase workforce representation because that creates a more inclusive culture. Basically, like we can't be a company that doesn't represent that of our users. There's just going to be kind of a divide between the products that we build for ourselves and for our users if we aren't, the kind of same heterogeneous group. And so in order to build for everybody, we basically need to get a little bit of everybody, and we want our workforce to be representative of the users that we serve. Next slide. Basically at Google, part of our hiring is we're really committed to creating an inclusive workplace for everyone, and that means creating an work environment where you're not afraid to bring your entire person to work. We want you to feel comfortable expressing your interests regarding technical things, but also just who you are as a person, your interests outside of work. And we feel that even if it's not directly related to what you're working on at the moment, it's important to get all of those outside perspectives. Part of that is also trying to expand the way that we reach out to different groups. So that's different kinds of schools, different kinds of organizations, to bring in the next generation of Googlers so that we get this kind of diverse representation of perspectives coming into all of our teams and products. Sascha, do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. And it's interesting because there are like certain aspects that you have to think about when you develop and create products for basically absolutely everybody, right? Especially if you think about diversity and equity and inclusion. There are certain things, of course, that we can be aware of, and then there are certain things that we might not be aware of. And one example here, I think, is like, for example, Google Camera. And I have worked at Google Camera before. You work at all these different algorithms to make the experience better. So, for example, you're trying to focus on faces, right? So you want to make sure that if you, for example, train a machine learned model to detect faces, to make sure to include all kinds of people, all kinds of skin colors, all kinds of styles, different environments, and so on. So to really, make sure that you think about diversity and inclusion, not just in terms of like your environment, but also about like the products that you actually create and the technology that you create. And there are like a lot of efforts around that, and it's super important to think about that. And again, like the more diverse a team is, the more likely it is that you think about these things and you know exactly what matters. Let's see, what do we look for? Do you want to continue, Joyce, for these?
Sure. All Google applications, even if you talk to us in a career fair or if you meet us in a conference, all of our applications go through the website, so google.com/careers. And on this application, we ask you to provide a resume. And what you put on this resume is pretty important. So I would say something I would encourage you to do is, like, you don't have to submit one resume to every job application. You can tailor, you can absolutely tailor, no one's checking, right? So you can absolutely tailor your resume that you're submitting for this particular job application. And so what we put on the careers website is we put a set of minimum qualifications when we put a set of preferred qualifications. And what you should what you should demonstrate on this resume is that you meet all of the minimum qualifications. We definitely check for that, and then as many of the preferred qualifications as you meet. Other things that are worth highlighting is just relevant coursework. Mostly we're interested in making sure you have the relevant data structures and algorithms coursework, but also if you're interested in a specific topic in computer science, like for me it's computer graphics, it's worth pulling out those courses as well, just to highlight maybe products that you'd be interested in working or teams that you'd be interested in working on. We also like to see projects that you've worked on. A hackathon is a great example of this, just because it's very different learning about these things. Sorry, could someone mute?
I'll be taking care of that.
There we go.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't sure how to resolve that. But yeah, so projects, because it's a very different kind of application when you, for instance, take a class, you learn about data structures, you learn about algorithms, and then actually applying them to a product and showing that you have a product vision and you can bring it to completion. That's a very critical skill set, because at the end of the day, we're building products here at Google. And so we'd love to see that demonstrated just on your own as a side project maybe, or even just like extracurricular things. It doesn't have to be your thing brought from conception to end. It's like pitching into maybe something like research in your university, another large scope or another scoped project that you can demonstrate that there was some amount of design and planning going into it. We love seeing things like that. And then once again, projects like that allow you to demonstrate industry level coding, which if you put a GitHub link or you show like a post about what you've built, that's something we love to see included on your resume as well.
Couldn't agree more. There's actually a question on the chat that I think, Joyce, you just answered. Ahmad was asking whether what kind of what are we looking for, how much past experience is important, and if like personal projects count. And I think, Joyce, you just wonderfully answered that. Yeah, personal projects definitely count. GitHub, especially if you have any open source projects that you have worked on where you can demonstrate some of that, that's definitely helpful. And in the end, it's as long as you have the experience, these projects will definitely help you, get kind of like your foot in the door. But like once you are doing the interviews, right, that's when it really matters that you have you have all that background knowledge to actually go through these interviews. We'll go through some of that. But definitely, personal projects, these hackathons, things like Advent of Code, and we have also some projects at Google that are similar, just really, really matter and can really help you.
Two shameless plugs, partially because I've worked on them. So one of them is FooBar. If you've ever just searched enough technical type stuff and then you get a prompt, would you like to participate in this? That is actually kind of, we consider that an example of your coding abilities. So that strongly recommend that if you have interest in that kind of problem solving. And the other one is Google Code Jam. Registration is actually currently open. We take registration through the month of March, and then the competition starts in April. But this is a coding competition. It's time-based. There are prizes at the end. But once again, we are able to use this as like a code sample and a demonstration of your abilities, if that's something you're interested in participating in.
Yeah, I just jumped forward to that slide because we actually had a slide in here to actually outline these. So perfect. Yes. These can definitely be super, super helpful. We also had a question. Ahmad is also asking, he's curious, like, what's the life of a software engineer at Google? What are some projects a new hire may be working on? I mean, I can try to take a stab at it. I mean, these are two different questions, right? And I think also it depends, of course, greatly, like what projects are you working on? You know, what level are you at? What location are you at? So it can really change. It can, you know, be quite different depending on where you're at. But I think like for like a new person coming in, what we typically try to do is, you know, we're trying, you know, we typically have a lot of things going on in a given project that might be really good learning steps towards like, you know, becoming like a more senior software engineer. So we're trying to expose new hires to like various different projects so that they can get well-rounded in understanding all the different aspects that the given project has, you know, has to offer, because typically these projects are pretty complex. You know, there might be some front-end work, there might be back-end work, there might be networking, there might be data storage. And it's really important to get familiar with all the tools. I mean, Joyce can probably also talk to that, but it's like once you start at Google, there's just so many tools that, you know, no matter how smart you are coming in, it's just overwhelming, I think. It's just like, wow, this is like, you know, the way you write the code, the test frameworks that we have, all the documentation, all the different groups that you're on. So it's really about like learning all these tools by, you know, finishing some like smaller tasks that you can finish pretty quickly. And then at some point, you know, once you're really comfortable with all of this, you know, you'll get more and more and bigger projects. And that's how you can then build your career. The same thing is also kind of true for an internship, because an internship is typically just a few weeks or months. So we typically carve out a certain project that the intern could finish in that time frame end to end. So we don't want, you know, an intern just to come in and not quite finish what they started. We want to have, you know, you want them to have a feeling that they accomplished something. And what's also important to note here, whether that's a nuclear or an intern, you will most likely work on production code. Like, you know, all the project that I've been working on, an intern or a nuclear will get a project that will right away make an impact and is often very visible.
I have a fun story about that. I was when I was an intern on Google+, I submitted something to production code on a Friday and brought down a part of Google+ for the weekend, and got a lot of very angry SREs on my back. And the thing that was the worst thing about it is like there's not a new deployment until Monday, so it's like there really wasn't anything I could do about it at that point. But it was also okay because there weren't a huge number of user complaints about it.
With great power comes great responsibility. What's the saying?
Yeah, and also never push on Friday.
Yes, that's true. I'm saying while I just submitted a code CL, but oh well, that's fine. I see a question here. How important is it to get an internship? So I guess the question is like, how important is it to get the internship to get the full position? I'd say, I mean, it depends, right? I mean, you can come in direct. You can come with an internship. What's nice about an internship is that, you know, obviously the step towards being an intern is lower than to get like a full-time position. And it allows you to really, like, instead of just, you know, interview once and get that chance once, you have basically, you know, a few weeks to a few months to prove yourself and to show what you can do. So I personally, you know, like internships for that, for both sides, right? Because you produce more artifacts, you know, you interact with people that can then comment on your performance, should you then later decide to convert to a full-time position. So I would say definitely not required, but it is a nice way, you know, to spread out that time that you have to prove yourself from like a few hours to a few weeks.
And I think it's also worth keeping in mind that one internship counts for 2 interviews. So if you do 2 back-to-back interviews before you go for full-time, and you don't even have to interview, you just need to have good remarks on both your interviews. And if you only had 1, then you only have to do half the interviews. I will also say, like, I interned at Google and then decided not to come back for a second internship because I wanted to see what a different company operated like. And I think that's an experience that's worthwhile as well. So at the end of the day, it's like, I know people don't generally like interviewing, but I think like the internship experience is what's worth it rather than the conversion.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And it's actually something that I told interns that I've been hosting, that I've hosted in the past as well. Like, use the internships or use your internship experiences to really get a view on like different companies, right? There are certainly some people that, for example, they say, oh, I want to get into Google, or I want to get into like, Amazon, or into that and that company. And that's great, but it doesn't hurt just applying and doing an internship at a different company to get a comparison, right? So that you can make like a more educated decision in the end. And it can only have benefits. That's a really good point.
Yeah. And also, once again, diversity of perspective, right? If you worked somewhere else and you thought they did something better than your full-time team does it here at Google, then it's a worthwhile perspective that we appreciate and we like.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. Let's see. I'm just taking a look at some of the questions. Let's see, we have Hashvir is asking, I read my bachelor's, worked for 5 years, went back to school for a master's, finding it hard to get back into the industry. Any thoughts or pointers? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, good question. I mean, I'm not quite sure exactly in terms of finding it hard. Is like finding the right position. It really depends. I mean, again, like an internship is always a good way to get back in and just to see like, what you might like, what kind of different roles are out there for you, and just get a taste for it.
Hey, Sasha, thank you. This is Harsh. Is it okay if I unmute myself?
Please, absolutely. It's great to hear people.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for answering that question. So to give you a little bit of a background, I worked as a backend developer, like a Java backend developer for the 5 years when I did work. And then I, developed an interest in machine learning, artificial intelligence, got into my master's. I worked on 3 different projects, published an IEEE paper, and did a bunch of research in machine learning and artificial intelligence. In spite of all of that, I'm finding it hard to find any entry-level positions in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Everybody wants 3 years of industrial experience. So, just getting left, right, and center rejected anywhere I apply. So, I don't want to put you in the spot, but do you have any pointers?
It's a good question. I mean, usually our when you start at Google, when you just apply for like a regular like entry-level position, no industry experience is typically required there. Again, if you can, if you're straight out of university, for example, you can apply for these positions. So I would be surprised if, for example, if you applied at Google, they would reject you for that reason. Definitely happy to think offline about this as well, if that's what you experienced at Google. But again, for like normal entry-level positions or even like slightly higher up, that shouldn't be that hard of a requirement, like the amount of years that you've worked in the industry.
Thank you very much for offering that. I do think that we should sync up offline because this is very specific to me, and I would like everybody else to benefit from the time you have. Is it okay if I join my LinkedIn?
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you. Let's see. There was one question that came up here about like whether we hire interns with a background of biology computing. I'm not quite sure. I don't know.
I have an answer for that.
Oh, perfect.
I have an answer for that. Yeah, so a team I worked on before, the Tiltbrush team, we had an intern. We had an intern who had minimal coding experience. Like she could do kind of basic. She had a basic grasp of data structures and algorithms. But what we were most interested in her was she was actually doing a degree in human-computer interaction. And so she had a lot of insight onto what that was all about. So more the human side than the computer side. And the rest of us were software engineers. And so that was really interesting insight for us. And so I would say it's like there are probably teams out there where the need for what you're bringing in is more important than your programming. So you do need to have a baseline. But if there's a team, I guess Verily is technically not Google, but like there's probably a team where your knowledge in biology is more interesting to them than just the programming part.
Yeah, great points. I mean, definitely also take a look at, I guess, the Google careers page. I'm pretty sure like there might be some listings actually there if they're currently looking for roles. Let's see. So I see some more questions here. By the way, thank you for all the questions. That's really great because that was exactly our goal to like answer as many questions as we can. There's one here about, whether new grad positions are reserved for past interns or whether you have a fair chance if you haven't been a Google intern. Absolutely a fair chance. Again, I think these are just like two different options, right? Like an internship at Google is kind of a good way to prove, you know, what you can do, and there's like a bit more history. But I think the majority, of all of our new grad positions are probably filled by non-Google interns, I would say. I don't know, Joyce, is that your take as well?
That sounds right to me. It's just like the number of interns we have is just nowhere near the number of new hires that we have.
Exactly. It's a very small portion, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you know, our interns are highly coveted by other companies too, so they don't always come back.
That's true. Ahmad is asking how to get better at data structures and algorithms. Well, I mean, I guess one thing is, as we just said earlier, right? Participate in hackathons, write a lot of code. Participate in these events. I think that definitely helps a lot, right? Just repeat, just get the hang of it. You know, you can study it, that's one thing, but really the practical part is something that really makes you appreciate what it really means. There's like a fun little story. I think that was just in the news this week. Apparently somebody was really upset that in GTA Online, I think, like that it took like 7 minutes to load the game. And they reverse engineered it basically and found out that, like, I think it was the C function scanf or something was actually had a different kind of complexity of what they probably anticipated when they wrote that code. And, you know, long story short is basically that they reduced the loading time of that screen from 7 minutes down to, like, I don't know, like a minute and a half or so. Just by basically finding that somebody used a function in a way that made the whole thing basically quadratic or something in complexity while parsing a JSON string. So as you can see, even like, you know, industry veterans that create a game like GTA sometimes screw that up. I don't know, Joyce, what do you think? That's probably like just repetition, right? Just do it a lot.
Yeah, I guess like I always enjoyed coding competitions, and most of them post their historic questions. And so those are fun just to go through and see how you would have placed in a way. I would say, just because I worked on CodeJam and I'm most familiar with it, that the qualification round is about the difficulty of our interview questions. So I think that's like a good place if you just want to get a sense of what you might be seeing. And also the style that we write the questions in is very similar to the style that we ask our interview questions in. Other things, like I remember I practiced on Project Euler. There are a lot of prettier websites these days, but that's one that I will always recommend. So things like that. It's just some way to verify a question, an algorithm question, a way to verify that you've done it correctly is basically all you're looking for. And just do more of them. You'll actually notice that a lot of them, they only fall into a couple buckets. And so just learning to recognize those buckets and learning to recognize it quickly is really the key to this.
Yeah, I agree. And learning when you might not have enough information, right? Especially if you're calling other libraries that you're using. Like that's one thing as well, right? When you have maybe like a certain function that you're looking for. Let's say you want to parse some JSON, XML, whatever it is. And you pull in this library that you find somewhere for free, and you're just calling that method. Like at this point, you don't really know, right? Because you haven't written it. So it might look to you as if, you know, you have maybe like a loop somewhere that goes over some files. You call out this function to parse it. It looks like, oh, this is ON, like I'm just looping once, right? But you don't know what that method does deep down inside, right? So like understanding that and measuring, and if possible, reading the code that you're using will be super helpful. And I just posted the link, by the way, to that GTA hack into the chat if anybody is actually curious about this, reading about this later. We have a question here for you, Joyce. Basically, the question is how you find, I guess, working for Apple and Google different. What questions might a candidate ask interviewers to get insights into personal fit and company culture?
So that's an interesting question. So I guess Google and Apple were different from like the interviewing stage. So the way you interview at Google is you do this like software engineer interview, and then especially as a new grad, you do this interview, you pass, and then you're already guaranteed a job, and then you go into team matching. So you talk to a bunch of different teams, figure out what you might be interested in working on figuring out which teams might have use of you, and then you pick a team. The way the interview process works at Apple is there's a team that's interested in you before you even start interviewing, and you interview with that team specifically. You interview for skill sets needed for that team. And so that was kind of curious to me, but it didn't really stand out as that much of a difference. But once you join, I guess the main thing with Apple is that it's very siloed. It's very compartmentalized. So I worked on core graphics. So I was working on basically the window manager, and I know like I was working with the preview team above me, and I was working with like Metal below me, but like we interfaced with each other kind of like we were in different companies, which is, you know, good and bad. It's good because we have to design good APIs and learn how to, you know, work with other members of the company the same way we'd have to work with our developers. But I found that I liked that a lot less than Google, where you kind of could just poke anyone anywhere and ask them how something worked. If they didn't have time to explain it to you, the code, you could see all the code. You can just go and dig through how something worked on your own. And I enjoyed being able to do that. That's kind of how I got into VR in the first place, because when I was interning on photos, Cardboard, so the VR department had just gone off the ground, and I was able to just ping people who were working on it and kind of like start digging into it and developing my own little toy applications on it. And that's something I don't think could have happened at Apple. I just wouldn't have known about this project.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that perspective.
Not to say anything bad about Apple. I think it's just a different way of doing things. But it was my preference to come back to a culture like Google.
Did we have a live question?
I have a question, if you don't mind. Just more about how you guys got started. So I know Joyce talked about it a little bit already, but what was like so I'm a very like new to software. I have more experience in business, and I'm a finance major. But I'm really interested in like learning more. So just wanted to know like what was your initial start like, and how did you guys improve early on?
Good question. So you mean like even like improving before even applying for the job, just like getting into software engineering and kind of honing your skills? Mm-hmm. Good question. I mean, I think there are probably like a million different ways you could go about it. For me personally, I think, I just got interested in writing my own software pretty early on. I won't say what computer that was on because that really dates me. But from there on, I basically, I started with some of the basics, just like trying out with some toy projects. And then I tried to find, some topics that were really interesting to me. Like, for example, at some point I really got into game programming. I really thought that sounds kind of cool. I want to do graphics and game programming. So I basically tried to get a lot of resources around that and trying to get into that. And I tried to start some personal projects of mine. So I think that's really one thing, once you start learning, you want to stay motivated, right? So in order to stay motivated, you should try to select a personal project that is fun for you, and that maybe even like once you finish it, you'll be proud of it. It might even be helpful for you. And that's actually something that I'm still doing to this day, because there's an infinite number of things that you can try to learn. And, the last few years, I really tried to get into like home automation, like programming microcontrollers. That's something I haven't done before. So I basically combine those, and I buy these little microcontrollers, and I learn how to program them. And the goal is in the end that I can control things around my house. So again, I'm learning something new, and that's how I started, and that's what I still do basically to this day. So I would say, choose a certain project, a certain topic that really interests you, that keeps you motivated, and then start with something small and simple, and then just add on top of it. That's one thing that definitely helped for me.
Got it.
Yeah, I would second that. I think I was forced to take this intro class, which I'm really glad, because I don't think I think I've done previous workshops, and I might have mentioned this, but this was a graduation requirement in my high school, and I wanted so badly not to take this class. I actually petitioned to have it removed as a graduation requirement, and I think the petition went through, but for the year after me. So I had to take this class anyway, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, the thing about this class is that it was very open-ended. So it was one class that was like fundamentals. This is syntax. This is how you make something build and run. And then the class after that was like, what do you want to build? And it was kind of like a workshop class. And I ended up getting into computer graphics that way. I wanted to build an animation system. And so it's projects like that that really kept me going. Things like a project that I would start in a hackathon. I think I started a home automation thing in a hackathon as well, and like built that out over the course of a couple years, just on the side while I was in college. It's kind of a blessing, because at a certain point, like, I feel like doing this job is kind of doing my hobby as my job, and it's just kind of neat to have that kind of motivation. It really doesn't feel like a job most of the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I also had one more question, if you don't mind, about, I know I asked before about product management, and I wanted to know, like, how does your role relate to product managers? Are you communicating with them, or are you guys on like a software only team?
Yeah. Really excellent question. So at Google, typically the way it works is, a project typically has a size of, it really depends. Sometimes you have 10, 20, 30, 40 people, sometimes more, but then you also start basically fragmenting it into multiple teams. And each project typically has like different roles on it, right? You typically, well, most of them are usually software engineers, but then you typically have at least one product manager on that team as well. You also have UX, user experience, usually on there. If it's like something bigger, you might have UX researchers on the team as well. If it's something that actually goes out, you might have like some business people on there as well. But I think the core trifecta, the way I look at it, is like you have software engineering, you have product management, and you have UX. And you have those typically on almost every project. And yeah, you work very closely together, typically with between like PM and engineering, between PM and UX, and between engineering and UX. You usually have a very close relationship, and you are meeting with them typically on a weekly basis.
Okay, awesome. For product management, do they need that same level of software background as well?
It's a good question. I don't know, Joyce, if you have more details. I mean, definitely you have to have some background. I know that especially in the early days of Google, typically like PMs were also somewhat solid engineers, although they wouldn't usually program anymore. But I would definitely say like every product manager at Google has a somewhat solid background, so that they can, they can evaluate the options that they're choosing. And also it makes it easier when engineers talk to a PM and try to explain him why something is maybe hard. It just makes it easier if you speak the same language.
Okay.
Yeah, I would elaborate on that. We have a PM role and we have a TPM role. So PM is still slightly technical, and a TPM is like could be an engineer, but is a PM. So we do differentiate between those roles. And yeah, I've worked with both TPMs and PMs, and it's pretty distinct. I want to say, like, as an engineer, it's easier for me to work with a TPM, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, they play the same role relative to the way your team presents externally, or partners.
little asterisk there too. TPMs are actually program managers typically. So they have slightly, I mean, yeah, it's very similar. And sometimes actually these roles merge.
Yeah.
Depending on how big your team is. If you have a bigger team, you might have multiple PMs and TPMs. Sometimes you might have only one PM, then he has to also be the TPM. It depends a little bit, but yeah, that's true, Joyce. Yeah. They're definitely both quite technical typically. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Do you mind if I ping you guys separately? I'm really, really interested in like product management and just wanted to talk to you guys more about that.
Please do. Well, definitely. I'm happy to find any information that I can find.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right. I'm trying to look through the chat a little bit to see, and if I skip any question accidentally or I miss some, definitely feel free to just post them again so they come up again. Let's see. There was one question around aside from data structures and algorithms, what other topics are important, and then maybe there was like a similar question here somewhere as well.
Yeah. Besides data structures and algorithms, what kind of skills do you think are important to develop to work in Daydream or XR like you guys are?
Joyce, do you want to take it?
Well,
where to start, right?
Yeah, where to start? It's I applied to Daydream when it was I guess I applied to a very specific role in Daydream, and so I didn't have the most standard of like new grad experiences. It was basically like I was interviewing with a team and they wanted to see specific skills, and for me that was knowledge of how to use a game engine. So in my case it was like familiarity with Unity. My team was using Git, so that was helpful. And so I guess there's kind of two separate parts. I think we're looking at the interview slide, but it's basically, for me it's like 4 technical interviews that weren't very related to what I was doing, and then a couple like still technical interviews that are more targeted toward what I was working on. And that was just general knowledge of like computer graphics knowledge, things like scene graphs, things like rendering, and depending on the level that you want to come in, it'll be more or less specific, or which role you're trying to fill, it'll be more or less specific to that. And for my role, it was somewhat more generalist, so having a high-level knowledge of game programming was all I really needed. I guess other things, I want to say during my interview, I was a little bit surprised. Most of it's data structures and algorithms, but like I remember I had like a multi-threading question that was kind of interesting because I'm not confident my interviewer knew the right answer either. And so that was actually a lot of fun because you were just talking through it. Things like system design, I think usually there's a pretty technical, high level but technical question about like, here's an abstract like system, a goal we want to accomplish, how would you design a system to do that? So I think those are, those won't be the majority of your interview, but they could come up.
Thank you.
Yeah. That sounds about right. And by the way, just a second, what you just said, I think my very first interview, I think that was for the internship, they also asked me this really difficult questions around how I thought a browser or like the Firefox JavaScript engine would do like certain context switching. And I was panicking because I was like, I have no idea. And so I ended up just like, trying to discuss the whole thing and what I think it probably does and how I would probably do it if that was me. But I was like jittery. I was like, I don't know that. I didn't know I need to know that for this internship position. And so at the end of the interview, I was asking them, I was like, so what's the correct answer? And they said like, yeah, we don't know. We just want to discuss it with you. So that can happen as well. Maybe more rarely, but it has happened.
Yeah, that's happened to me, not at a Google interview, but at an interview at another company. It was just an engineer wanted to talk over something that they were working on.
I should do that more often when I do interviews. That sounds like a good practice, actually. We have one question here. That's actually an important one. We got one question from AR regarding diversity. I've interviewed in other companies for about a year now, and once I open up about my disability and needs, I get ghosted or I get a rejection email. What does Google do to accommodate people with special circumstances? Also, may we comment on your LinkedIn? Yes, you can definitely connect on our LinkedIn, no problem. I hope you didn't have this experience like Google. Google itself is definitely very open. Again, as we said earlier, we want to build for everyone, right? And that's not just about diversity and inclusion, but it's also about, you know, that includes disabilities as well. I have like 2 stories that I can actually share there as well that I find absolutely amazing, that opened me up, like even like early on, to like certain things that I didn't even think about. One of them is, I think I was like at Google for like 2 years at the time. And we have, for example, some blind software engineers at Google. And I was always wondering, how does this work? Because, you know, it's even like for me as a sighted person, it's difficult to like navigate all the tools. And they gave this tech talk about all the tools and stuff that they have set up so that they can be effective during their work. And really, one thing that was kind of interesting is, you know, at the time there was this huge debate about our max column limit for, I think, C++ code at the time. Basically, you know, the limit is like 80 characters. And a lot of people are like, wow, why just 80? Why not 100? Why not 120? This 80 characters is so archaic. And for example, those blind software engineers were telling us like, well, for us, it's actually nice to have 80 because most of our Braille readers that we use to read code, they're 80 columns wide. So for us, you're actually doing us a favor if you keep it at 80 because we can more efficiently scan the code. So wow, right? It's great. It's great to have that. Another example is there are like projects at Google, for example, that deal with like certain hearing issues. I forget what the project is called. I think we actually published some findings around that as well. But again, another topic where, you know, just having a diverse group of people can really help improving our products. I think we just announced, like with the Android 12 release that's coming out very soon, it'll have quite a few improvements for blind users as well. And again, you can't develop it if you don't have people with experience that can actually tell you in which direction you need to develop these things in. And yeah, so I hope you didn't have this experience at Google, because I think my experience at Google has been that we really embrace that, and we're trying to to use that experience to actually make our products better for absolutely everyone.
Yeah, I would agree. And I want to say I work with a lot of UX folks where taking into account things like dyslexia, which I know there are dyslexic Googlers, and things that's like our fonts, our font choices. It's like, what's our font right now? Google Sans. Google Sans is actually a terrible font for dyslexic people, unfortunately. And so we have these style guidelines. It's like if your font size is below a certain amount, you're just not allowed to use Google Sans. And so for like, I don't have dyslexia, and that's not something I ever would have picked up on. And so I feel like we need people. We enjoy having people who are able to point these things out and say like, hey, there's going to be a set of our users for which this is just not going to be a comfortable experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I'm scrolling through the questions. There's one here. Oh,
Can I actually ask a question really quick?
Please do. Yes.
So my question was about, so for example, if Google has an open source software, but they're also they also have engineers that they hire to work on it. For example, Flutter. Mm-hmm. Do you think you should try and, because I'm graduating soon, right? So maybe I'm past getting the internship phase, depending, right? Where should I be trying to like submit for the open source and then maybe applying and say, hey, I've already done work on the open source portion of Flutter. Now I would like to work on this. Do you think that's something that makes sense for multiple open source kind of programs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely. Great question, by the way. Thank you for asking it. Yes, I think so. If you can, if you're interested in a certain topic, like let's say Flutter, and we have the open source code, and you take a look at the issue tracker, and there may be some things where you feel like, oh, I can maybe contribute to this. Absolutely, I think this would be a great thing to have on a resume, to show that you have already participated, or you have already contributed to the code base, because it shows that you obviously know what the style guide is, how to follow it. You write high quality code, testable code, and so on. It was probably peer reviewed by somebody on the Flutter team in this case. So yeah, definitely, obviously not a must, but that I think would be a great way to improve your chances, I would say.
Yeah, I would also say part of your application process, you have a point where you can offer up names of Googlers who you have worked with in the past, and that is a huge boost to your application. And so if you happen to have worked with the Googler on this open source project, then that's a fantastic name to put down.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rishabh asked the question, I've heard that Google really loves craft questions on interviews. It's kind of embarrassing because we have an example in these slides and it's also a craft question. So maybe that's true. What are some other fundamental structures you feel are more frequented than others? Yeah, good question. I mean, crafts are algorithms, right? Like certain graph algorithms. I think in terms of data structures, they're the obvious ones. Like, think about arrays and lists, hash maps, hash tables. Those happen everywhere, right? If you do, for example, these kind of coding, coding competitions or hackathons, F of code and so on, you'll realize there are certain things that you always use, right? And at some point you develop a sense for like, oh, when should I use a list? When should I use an array? When should I use a map? What are the benefits? Tree structures, of course, also super important. I don't know, Joyce, what do you think? What are your favorites? Or maybe not your favorites, but what do you think is important?
I want to say in the interviews I've done, because I think it's common knowledge that we like graphs, I get some candidates who look at a problem that's not a graph problem and they try to apply a graph to it. And so I would recommend not doing that. I want to say there are a handful of algorithms that are useful just to know off the top of your head. Things like topological sort. Like there are a lot of problems that don't need it to be solved, but are a lot easier if you know how to do something like that quickly. So common algorithms like that, I think, are good to keep in mind as well. Yeah, I want to say graph problems are pretty common. Recursion problems, we also usually have them, mostly because I think what we're notorious for is dynamic programming. And I want to say, if you get an interview where there's a DP solution, just do the recursive one first. Get something working, and then we'll talk about the DP solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a common thing where a lot of I see people who try to jump through to the solution they know we're kind of looking for. And I think another thing about our interviews is that we don't necessarily need you to code the entire solution if you run out of time. If you can express it well and just show that we ran out of time, but you know exactly what you're doing, that earns you most of the points too. As long as you've coded something, we don't need you necessarily to code out the entire thing. And so I think those two things are worth keeping in mind as well.
Yeah, I second that. And like another aspect there is also, I think it's normal when you see the question that you are probably feel like, oh, how am I supposed to like solve that in this amount of time? And sometimes it's okay if you don't. It really depends on the question. Like sometimes it's supposed to get you into this kind of stressful state. So definitely don't panic. It's maybe rule number one. We have a few more questions. I can go through some more of these questions. We can also go maybe into some more things to actually look out for the interview. Although, I guess we'll share these slides, so you can definitely read that up there and ask us later. So let's maybe continue with the questions. Does that sound good? I think we have actually two people raising their hands here, I see. I think we have Alex first and then Lena. So maybe Alex, if you have a question.
Hi, yeah.
Hey.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions for everybody. My question is about what would you say worries you about hiring new Googlers, or like, say you do get hired, someone does get hired as a new Googler. Is there anything that like that might concern you, like whether about maybe like how well they integrate into the culture, or maybe like they're having trouble managing the workload in Google, and how would maybe like things to like watch out for or prepare for, things like that.
Good question. I don't know, Joyce, do you have a thought?
I can start. So I think that most of the pressure that new Googlers get is pressure that they put on themselves. And so we, as a general rule of thumb, we expect like 6 months of onboarding for anyone new. So there's certainly not an expectation that you jump in and you're immediately as productive as everyone else on the team. That's an unreasonable expectation. And so there's kind of like the 6-month warm-up period where like I think I've had managers tell me this in the past. It's like I don't ask enough questions. I spend so much time just too proud to ask questions and just spending a lot of time figuring things out on my own, or honestly just kind of afraid to bother my peers. And the thing I love about Google's culture is that there's no embarrassment. Everyone's just super friendly and very willing to help out. And as far as like seeing people who struggle, I want to say like usually if there's something I don't understand, I have a colleague I'm working with closely on it who I'm happy to just have a conversation just to clarify what I'm trying to do, get unblocked on whatever I'm working on. And I guess it's partially like a self-initiative. There's a part of that it's taking on the responsibility to just make sure that you don't get into that situation. Unfortunately, I can't really come up with a situation where I have observed someone else unable to get the help that they need. I don't know, Sascha, you've been at Google longer.
Yeah, good question. I mean, one thing that just came to my mind is also, it's kind of interesting the way, Alexia, you're kind of like thinking there, because I think, a lot of Googlers, I think, experience imposter syndrome, right? Where you're like, you're under the stress. You're like, oh God, I'm not good enough. Why didn't they hire me? Like, I'm wrong here. Like, everybody else is so much smarter than me. That's normal. I think even after like 13, 14 years, like you get in contact with so many brilliant people, working right now on quantum computers, for example. I'm like, what am I doing here? So I think that's pretty normal. I think Joyce, as Joyce has said as well, I think, the expectation is, that you're not going to be productive right away. And that's, totally unreasonable. So struggling is mostly maybe not finding the right information, because there is just a lot out there. And the good thing is you get a mentor. When you start at Google, you get a mentor that is just another random Googler that you can always ask. And that is super, super helpful. I remember like my mentor when I started was absolutely amazing and helped me navigating like that landscape. So I think it's really mostly that, otherwise, you basically grow with your abilities, right? Once you get started, the more you get done, the more you learn, that's usually when your scope expands and you do more things. There could be a problem where maybe like you take on a little bit too much, but even if that happens, just talk to your peers, talk to your manager, and make sure like, you communicate that things might need a little bit more effort than you thought. But I think overall, I think that's also one reason I think why maybe it's a bit harder to get into Google, is because like once you're there, I mean, I don't even remember anybody who was really like, let go because of their performance. That doesn't happen very often. It would be a huge process too. So we err on the side of like, let's make sure that this person can really succeed and thrive within Google, rather than, making the mistake that maybe there isn't like a good fit. And like, after you start working, some people might progress a little bit faster, some people progress a little bit slower, and that's maybe what they want with their career path, and that's totally fine. You basically just, grow with the tasks.
Okay, so you're saying like, for sure, like reach out to your mentor and ask questions.
Yes, ask questions. Don't feel dumb for asking questions. I know that might sound obvious, but I think we all went through that, right? You don't want to ask a question because you feel like, oh, you might be the only one asking this question. When in reality, it's usually the case that 90% of people in the room probably have the same questions, but are also afraid to ask it. So, and I think that's also true as a nuclear at Google, or not even just as a nuclear, as a Googler, right? I just ask the question. There's a high chance that there are many other people that don't know the answer to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see, we have Lena.
Hi, thank you so much for having this event. I'm learning a lot. I posted my question in the chat as well, and it's just about how Google parses resumes. So I'm wondering if Google uses automated systems to parse resumes, since I know that there are a lot of applicants, and if so, how should applicants best format their resumes?
Good question. Thank you for asking the question, Dina. I don't know if I have an answer to that, because usually when I see the resumes, they have already gone through a recruiter. I would say in terms of the formatting, though, I would say try to keep it simple. I've definitely seen people, submit resumes that were maybe a little bit too fancy, because, for us, for the recruiters and also for me as a hiring manager, if I want to see your history, I want to see it very quickly. I want to be very, quick by being able to parse through the resume. So try to keep it simple and also try to keep it short. For example, even somebody who has like 5 or 10 years of experience, you shouldn't really have more than, let's say, 2 pages worth of stuff, and keep it pretty short. That's what I would say. I don't know, Joyce, what do you think?
It's the rule of thumb I've heard from recruiters is 1 page per decade of experience. And this is specific to software engineering roles. And if you have, if you've done a PhD and you have publications, then that's a different story too. But in general, rule of thumb, and when you break from 1 page to the next, like really think about if you have enough material to fill that 2nd page, because it's very awkward if there's just a little bit on top. I think the other thing I've mainly heard from recruiters is make the dates very clear. They're interested in where you've been and for how long. And then that's the first thing that we all look for. And then we'll start looking at the details. I don't really have any sense of whether or not we use automated systems. If anything, I feel like in addition to the resume, we ask you to fill in a couple of things. And once again, like I mentioned earlier, we only screen, if you will, we only screen based on minimum requirements. And that's, we state exactly what those are. So if, I want to say when I got my internship, I didn't exactly meet minimum requirements. So I would say, there's a little bit of leeway there, but that is those are stated for a reason. And so I want to just make sure that those are clear on your resume, that you meet the requirements of the qualifications of the position you're applying for.
Yeah, I would second that, because also what we currently have on the screen here, the interview process at Google has quite a few steps. And so the very first step, of course, is that a recruiter will actually pick up your package and take a look. And yeah, they will typically, as Joyce said, match those minimum requirements. The recruiters themselves are typically not very technical, right? So they will really just look at that. They will do some coding exercise and very small things, but that's really just a very first step of a screener. And then once you pass that, you'll get to the phone interview phase. You'll usually have 1 or 2 of those, and that's really where then that's where, what do you say, the rubber meets the road or something. That's where you really have to be able to shine and show what you can do. And I would say at that point, after the initial screening, once the phone interviews start, most people don't care about your resume anymore, because at that point we really focus on what was the performance during the phone interview. If it was good, you'll get to the on-site interviews, or I guess right now they're all virtual, but at some point we'll be on-site again, I hope. But that's really what matters then. The committee that will then take a look, the hiring committee that will take a look at each new candidate, they will mostly focus on the performance and the feedback that they get from the people that interviewed them. And the resume at that point doesn't matter as much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. Just quickly checking in with Leisha. I'm happy to keep on going. How are we doing time-wise?
So time-wise, we're a little bit over, but we're kind of lucky here because there are no workshops after you. So if you and Joyce are comfortable with going to 7:30, we can extend it. But again, at this point, it's just up to you guys and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm fine. I don't know, Joyce.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Can I ask a question, or is it done?
Cool. Let's do it. So somebody wanted to ask a question? I heard something.
Yeah. It was in the chat earlier. I just was asking because because I'm a graduate now, and So, and I never got any internship for SWE, and I want to ask for the software engineering, and I want to ask, like, what do you look what do you look for as a hiring manager if I don't have any internship in SWE before, but I have like projects and like hackathons?
Yeah.
Like when I too.
Yeah, I mean, good question. It really depends a bit, right? If, you know, again, you'll probably have some projects, I would assume, right? That, or some interest also, right? From, even if you just, you know, there was like a certain class that you really liked and you have something to show from that. But otherwise, I mean, we have these, like, we call them like general SWE positions, right? They are not really very specific. They're the most common type really of positions that we have at Google. And at that point, you really just have to know the basics. So as we said earlier, you know, algorithms, data structures, and all, you know, being really well-rounded there, you know, being confident in writing code. Like these interviews, for example, as well, like the phone interviews and the on-site interviews, you know, they're also all, the questions are typically general, right? Again, algorithms, data structures, as Joyce also said, some kind of like system design questions. We want to see how you tackle a certain problem, right? There's a problem, you don't know the answer to it, but you have to somehow figure it out in a limited amount of time. How do you handle that bit of stress, and how do you think through and come up with a solution in the end? And, you know, you don't have to be, you know, specifically, you know, like, you don't have to have a specific project in mind at this point. But once you pass that phase, that's usually then when you can take a look at projects that are actually hiring at Google, and where we then try to find a match between the candidates. You know, you can then express an interest. For example, you can say, oh, I like AR, VR. Are there any projects that are hiring a junior software developer like me? And then the hiring managers in these positions can then take a look and see whether that might be a good match.
Oh, can I ping you like directly so I can ask you more questions? So
absolutely, feel free, no problem.
Wait, how do I find you? Are you on Discord?
I am on the Discord, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
No worries. I don't know, Joyce, do you agree with what I just said?
Well, I've never been a hiring manager, so I guess I guess it's just more generally looking at the resumes. I think not having an internship is fine, because at the end of the day, what an internship gets you is a cool project to talk about. And so if you've done some research, or you've done a side project, or, you know, something along that vein, it kind of fulfills the same role.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying to find, do a project that directly relates to exact sector or some project that Google is currently working on, and like try to do like that. That's what you both are saying.
I wouldn't say that you need to find a project like Google has so many projects that it would be kind of crazy to try to list them all, or to try to target a single one. I would say just do a project that you are interested in working on, and there's probably something similar at Google going on that's relevant to your work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. Thank you.
I have a question as well about what you guys were saying before about minimum requirements and meeting that for getting to the phone interview. I noticed that the minimum requirements on the Google website or for the jobs are very general. Is there more specific requirements that you look at, or is it those same requirements that are listed very generally?
Yeah, typically they are very general, and I do agree. Sometimes, especially for the general SWE positions, they can be a little bit vague. But that's, I think, just true. There are there are a few positions where we are looking for a very specific know-how, a very specific experience, and maybe also a certain number of years. But those are, I think, in the minority. I think most of our positions that we're trying to fill, we're just trying to find a diverse pool of candidates. And as Joyce mentioned earlier as well, and I think that was true for me as well. Even if you don't quite match those, that's fine. Just you might compensate in another area. And we at Google also realized that number of years, for example, it's just a proxy. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't directly translate to experience. So definitely don't get discouraged by some of these maybe not quite matching up with what your resume states.
Yeah, and I would say, like in my case, I feel so like applying for an internship application. I forget what it says. I think it says you need like 3 years of school or something, and I had less than that. But I had other side projects, and I had coding competitions, and I had other things to show that I had the equivalent of maybe 3 years of schooling. And so exactly like Sasha said, it's just like that's like a watermark. I mean, ideally, if you have those, just like highlight that, super easy, check the box and move on. But if you don't, we do look beyond just, meeting exactly the criteria.
Yeah, totally.
And then once again, this is really the screening thing. Like, I don't think I've ever looked at a resume and compared it to the minimum requirements. I'm not even sure I know what the minimum requirements are. So this is purely for the screening.
Yeah, agreed.
Got it. And one more question. So if we know like a recruiter or find that out through any of like the Google events, do they like it if you reach out to them, or if you reach out to like an actual Googler, or how is like that? Like, is that a good thing to do? Or I wasn't sure if maybe you have to wait until like they see your resume and that whole process happens.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, recruiters definitely like it when you reach out to them, because that's kind of like their job, trying to find talent. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely, definitely don't hesitate if you see somebody at an event or however, that's totally fine. That's one way. The other way, yeah, I mean, if you know somebody at Google, right, there's also, we as Googlers, we can recommend people. So if we have worked with somebody, right, in a previous company, at a project, whatever it is, and we kind of think they could be a good fit for Google, and they're also interested to working for Google, then we can add them internally. And again, that doesn't give anybody a boost in terms of the screening. It just means that they might be a little bit higher up in the list, and they might get a call from a recruiter sooner. Although I don't even know if that's true anymore these days. But again, it doesn't help anybody necessarily, succeed in the interviews, but it just gives them like a little bit of an edge, because somebody is like, well, this is a great person. I vouch for this person. And that way, the screening might be a little bit easier. So if you know somebody at Google, certainly reach out to them.
Okay, got it. And then, so I was talking to a recruiter who was a business recruiter and didn't know like the technical side as much. So I didn't know if recruiters are connected in any way. Like I could ask him if he knows any like product management recruiters or not.
In my experience, they're typically not connected. They're typically, so we have like the engineering recruiters that are really focusing on finding the best engineers. And I'm pretty sure the PM recruiters look for the best PMs. Okay. That's my experience. Also, sometimes it can also be that recruiters, some of them have not been with Google for a really long time, because depending on, how the market is going, we might have more or less of them. So that can also be something. You might, recruiters, there are different kinds of recruiters with like different experience levels as well. So it's definitely worthwhile trying to find a recruiter in the area that you're trying to get hired in.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I would also say most schools have a designated Google recruiter, and they're kind of like a good central point to refer you to more specific recruiters for the role. So there's a recruiter dedicated to the school rather than to the role. And I'm not sure who or if SFSU has one, but I feel like we should.
We probably should.
Yeah.
Oh, we do? Good.
Yeah.
Ping Leisha.
You can find me on Discord.
Awesome. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Let's see, I see a question here from Rishab. Is it all right to rely on functions such as sort, map, or more high-level features in general that might not be present in C, for example? That's a good question. I would say yes, but so depending on what kind of problem you're solving, right? If you get this high level problem that you're trying to get to the bottom of, and let's say it involves sorting a list. It's you're not expected to also program the sort function necessarily, right? That's not what's being asked in the interview. And I would also urge you, if you're unsure about something like this, just ask the interviewer, right? Like, hey, do you want me to program this as well, or is it okay to use a standard library function, for example? However, whenever you use something else, as I mentioned earlier, you should know what the complexity and the implications are of the functions that you're using, right? So if you, for example, let's say in Java, right, there's the comparable interface, you can just sort. You can totally use that, but know what the complexity is, know what the cost is of using that function. That would be the caveat.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there was some article, some just thought article somewhere about like binary sort. It's like pretty much no one can write binary sort correctly without unit tests. And so to ask a candidate to write binary sort during an interview is not constructive. And especially like over the course of the job, you're not going to be writing your own binary sort. You're going to be calling a library. And so I would say we would never ask an interview question where a library function would make the question trivial. So ask if you're unsure, but it's probably fine to use. I think I saw another question maybe somewhere further up. It's like it was about can you expect to use things that you wouldn't find in standard C? And I guess I would say if you are going to interview in C, know the standard library well enough to leverage those like the sort and the maps if you want to, or expect to have to use them and just know what exists in the standard library. That's generally what we say for all our interviews. You can use a standard library. You can't use like very esoteric things or custom libraries, but you can always use the language's standard library.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's see. We have a question here. What are you two most excited about with the future of AR, VR? I don't know, Joyce, what are you excited about?
Well, I'm very excited with the number of units that Oculus is selling, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, but I am very excited because when I started working on VR back in like 2016, 2017, we thought this was like next coming. Yeah, we thought this was
I have
like
one as well. I mean,
and it's like we thought it was going to take off. Like the first maybe people don't know this, but the first coming of VR was back in like 1990 when we thought technology was good enough to make this happen. And it kind of was. It was only good enough for industry though. And then so we thought the second coming was like 2016, 2017, and it was almost there. It's just like you kind of had to be willing to splurge on like a gaming computer for a gaming PC for it. And now we're at a point where VR is competitively priced with like these consoles that have also taken off in their own way in the past decade. Like consoles were used to not be this common at all. And so now it's something like, I think I was driving down the street the other day and I saw an ad for SFSU with an an HTC Vive on it, and I was like, "This is when you know we've made it."
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the Oculus Quest, even though I wish it would have come from Google, but it's fascinating like where we are right now. Like that you can just buy this thing for like a few $100s. You don't need a gaming PC. You can just put it in your suitcase, your backpack, and you can use it anywhere. Definitely exciting to see that. And also again, like I think with like Google's mission, right now this is like really good for gaming and it's a lot of fun. I love it. But also to see how we can use AR and VR in the future, just to make, just to help people, just to support people. We also talked earlier, about people with disabilities. Same thing. I think we can actually use AR to help people with disabilities. Already like with AR, VR features on your phone, You know, you can, for example, use Google Lens to just, you know, help me know what this is, help me how to get somewhere. So I think, you know, I think in the future, you know, we're building this really strong framework of all these algorithms and technologies. And I think, you know, once AR and VR headsets evolve, I think there's going to be a good synergy between them. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, it's even like small use cases now for like the disability thing. I think I had a teammate whose father was very nearsighted, and it's just a simple thing like a pass-through lens. So he could actually see the VR screen, even though he couldn't see the real world. And so even small things like that can be pretty life-changing. I mean, we talk a lot in Google about ambient computing. And it's like the idea that you can just have technology, have these resources at your fingertips where it's not distracting. And so where we are today with like a very explicit, like I'm in headset mode or I'm not in headset mode, like that's just going to become blurry at some point where you always have access to this, just like, you know, a like visual overlay, maybe just providing you information or augmenting your world. And maybe it's not as, maybe it's just there without really getting in your way. Certainly not a 2-3 pound piece of headgear. So that is the hope. That's where I feel like this is the first step. Like that was kind of like a sci-fi dream until seeing everyone suddenly being okay with, you know, or maybe not everyone, but a significant number of people being okay with putting this kind of funky looking device on your head just because it gave you an experience.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's very cool. Thank you guys for answering my question.
Yeah, you're welcome. AR, you have a question? You have raised your hand?
Hello? Yeah.
Hey.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for answering my first question regarding disabled candidates.
Yeah.
I guess my second question is, you know, for someone with, you know, what I explained previously, what's the best way to approach someone from Google to connect with them, you know, to have that one connection and actually start talking to them, you know, so maybe it could lead to, you know, a referral, or at the very least them telling us how it is, you know. I don't know if I make myself clear.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thanks for asking the question. I mean, for referrals, typically, I mean, my experience, typically what happens is that you've met a person outside of Google before, either that, right? Or, you know, another example that we mentioned earlier is maybe you start working on an open source project or on some project that involves another Googler. That's also a good way to get in contact, because with a referral, when we as Googlers submit a referral, they typically ask us, you know, how much, you know, how well do you know the work of that person? And based on your experience, based on that work, you know, what do you think? So, you know, there has to be some overlap. There has to be ideally some work that the two of you have done together, so that they can actually vouch for the work that you've done together. So yeah, I think I like the open source idea. I think that's definitely something how you can get in contact. You know, there are like different events as well where you can get in contact with Googlers to hear more about, like, you know, what's how to participate in the hackathons, I think, as well. That's another big way to get in and have like a reference before you even apply for the position.
Okay, thank you so much.
I don't know, Joyce, do you have some more thoughts there?
Yeah, I was going to say events like this are exactly what you should be doing. It's a couple names, and if you have questions that we can't answer, we will introduce you to another Googler. There's certainly a Googler out there who can answer your question if we can't. And so it's just a network, and I'm not sure if SFSU is planning on going back on campus, but like events like that, we usually are better staffed on like in-person on-campus events. And like that's a great opportunity to meet and speak with Googlers as well.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Let's see. More questions in the chat. There's a question about Stadia. I don't know if I can answer it. I can give you an opinion. So there's a question about like how much time we think it might take for Google Stadia to compete with gaming consoles. Totally not my area. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can give you my personal opinion, but I don't know if that's very helpful. I don't know, Joyce, if you have an opinion on that.
I'm going to choose not to answer because I think I know too much about this.
Or that.
Sorry.
Ask her in person is what that meant. Cool. I know we have like 4 minutes left. I don't know, should we wrap it up here, or are there any more live questions maybe?
Yeah, let's hear some live questions, and if not, we can wrap it up.
And yeah, I think there's like, I think we're going to share these slides as well later, right? Because there's like a ton of stuff in there that we did not go over, but a lot of information that hopefully is very, very helpful to look at afterwards. And I think, you know, if there are questions coming up afterwards, definitely, you know, ping us on Discord. Happy to answer questions there.
Yes, there's a whole channel designated to Sascha and Joyce just for questions like this. So definitely go on Discord and find those. Is there any way we can stop sharing so I can take a photo really
Yes, if I can. Here we go.